This podcast is for educational purposes. Our guests aren't scripted and are free to speak their minds. Therefore, their views and opinions don't necessarily reflect those of BridgeBio Pharma. Also, your doctor is your best source of information about any symptoms you might be experiencing. Please consult a medical care professional about any health questions and concerns. Finally, quick note. Pantene is a third-party trademark. You will hear about our guest's unique experience starting a foundation from a Pantene contest. BridgeBio is not affiliated with or endorsed by Pantene or Procter & Gamble, and this reference is for storytelling purposes only. Now, we hope you enjoy the podcast.
Hello and welcome to On Rare Innovators, a podcast produced by BridgeBio, a biotech company that works on developing treatments for rare diseases. The goal of the Innovators series is to showcase the experiences of leaders in the rare disease community, people who think creatively, take action, and transform the lives of people living with rare conditions. These innovators could be advocacy leaders, clinicians, researchers, or industry pioneers. I'm your host, Mandy Rohrig, a member of the patient advocacy team at BridgeBio, and as always, I'm joined by my longtime friend and colleague, David Rintell, head of patient advocacy. Hi, David.
Hi, Mandy. Great to see you. So wonderful to be working on another Rare Innovators podcast. I remember back when the idea for this, the On Rare podcast, was written on the back of a napkin. I don't know if it was in an airport lounge, a place that served cocktails, or...
I think what we can say with confidence, David, it was likely the back of a cocktail napkin.
We're so happy to welcome Kat Bryant Knudson. She's the CEO of the Speak Foundation, a leading patient organization which supports people living with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. Kat, welcome to On Rare. We're so happy to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's good to be with you.
I have like a very linear, limited brain, and I always want to know where this story begins. So I guess if you could tell us about your life before you ever heard of limb-girdle muscular dystrophy or experienced any symptoms.
I sure can. So I was probably diagnosed in a time when genetic testing was unavailable. So muscle biopsies were the norm. At age 6, I developed my first episode of rhabdomyolysis. Sometimes you call it myoglobinuria. That's basically high CK. As a 6-year-old, I had that. And, the key feature is your urine looks like a rusty color. Basically, you're excreting myoglobin in your urine. And so that's the problem that you see with a lot of muscular dystrophies. And at 6 years old, I had that symptom. My parents were really attentive parents. They thought it was like a kidney issue or something along those lines. Didn't really realize that it was like a muscle breakdown issue, that my kidneys were filtering myoglobin from my muscles. So back then, they didn't know a whole lot about this type of thing. So that's kind of how it started. I lived in Richmond, Virginia, thankfully. So I had good access to good neurology. And so I saw a really good neurologist. His name was Dr. Robert Leshner at Virginia Commonwealth University. They did a muscle biopsy. I knew I had some type of muscular dystrophy, and we just didn't know the form. That form had not been discovered yet. The journey of finding out that I had LGMD2I/R9 was very interesting. I was constantly on top of it, though. If there was a new discovery, I would get tested for it. So I probably had like 4 to 5 muscle biopsies. And then I went to grad school, then ended up in Georgia working. Ended up at University of Rochester, and Ravi Tawil, who's a doctor up there, 2I had been discovered probably within the last 2 years. He said, I'm 95% sure I know what you've got. And in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, right. Because everyone always says, I think you've got this. I was like, okay, I'll just go through the motions and do your genetic test. And lo and behold, that's what I had. So that diagnostic journey of years and years and years of not having a name for it. And that's generally probably what the majority of people with limb-girdle weakness experience every day. They they don't have like a definitive answer.
Mhm.
For me to have a definitive answer, it was a relief. But then I found out it can have heart implications and it can have issues with your respiratory muscles. So I went and got a cardio exam. Obviously, I got an echocardiogram. I found out that I had a tumor in my heart that was unrelated to muscular dystrophy.
Oh,
I found out I had this benign heart tumor. So I ended up 2 weeks later, believe it or not, having heart surgery to remove a tumor. So within an 8-week time frame, imagine this, I got diagnosed with LGMD2I/R9 and I found out that I had a tumor inside my heart and that I was going to have heart surgery. So I found all that out in like 8 weeks. It was like very traumatic.
Kat, did they find the tumor because they were just kind of seeing how your heart was doing, like as a baseline once they gave you the diagnosis?
That's exactly what happened. I was doing, I mean, fine, really. I saw the cardiologist and they did the echo, and, he was actually thinking I was having symptoms from the tumor. And that's why I was getting the echo. He was like, "Why are you here with getting an echo?" And I was like, "Well, I have been diagnosed with, LGMD2I, and it can create cardiomyopathy. And so I'm getting just a baseline echo." And he was like, "Are you having trouble breathing?" And I was like, "No, why are you asking me that?" He was like, "You have a tumor in your heart." And I was like, "What?"
Oh my God.
And it was a pretty good sized tumor. The irony of all ironies is if I hadn't been diagnosed at that moment with 2I, I most likely would not have gotten the echo. And who knows what would have happened. Totally unrelated. You do not get heart tumors with 2I.
Kat, can I go back to what you said at the beginning? You were 6
Yep.
and you noticed that your urine was a rust color,
Like a tea color.
and that's because of
Myoglobinuria.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what that means? And then you also mentioned CK levels.
Yeah, Mandy, I was going to ask you to explain it because you're a physical therapist. You know about muscles. But Kat, your first symptom was tea-colored urine, but you didn't have any physical symptoms yet, right?
No, I did, but not knowing, when you're really a little kid, you think that's a
Yeah.
normal feeling. So when I was exercising, I would have muscle cramps. I just thought that being a kid, that was just something everybody had. Like when you exercised or ran, you had a muscle cramp.
Mhm.
I didn't realize that was abnormal. It was like I was feeling like I was at my max capacity exercising and I would get cramps in my muscles and then they would ache. And I just honestly thought that was like what everybody felt like. And that particular day, I had just really done a lot of physical activity. I was at the pool. I remember particularly that day, I was really shivering a lot as well because it was one of those days where it was a little overcast. And, there's something I've noticed too with people that have limb-girdle is that the cold tends to like fatigue their muscles more. So I think that was a contributing thing. But myoglobinuria is basically just myoglobin in your urine. So myoglobin and urea, but it's really called rhabdomyolysis. People shorten it to call it rhabdo. So one of the features is that you end up with really high CK.
And the CK is,
Creatine kinase, is that what CK is?
Yeah, that's what it is. Creatine kinase.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Kat, but like that's like an indicator that there's muscle breakdown, correct?
That's right. Or muscle, yeah,
Okay.
muscle breakdown. The muscles, you can kind of think of them as that they're leaking, because they're getting damaged. And then the kidneys are filtering the myoglobin, but they can't filter it all out. And so that myoglobin makes it that rusty tea color. That is pretty much like one of the main things that a lot of patients will see is rhabdomyolysis thing and high CK. And that's generally what takes them to the doctor. But, a lot of people don't realize, they don't maybe pay attention to that kind of a symptom. So they might just be really fatigued, really achy, and not even like associate that because, people are not getting random blood tests of CK levels. That was my first initial onset of symptoms that led the doctors to know there's something wrong.
do you recall like what your reaction was? You're 6 years old, and do you remember back then what it was like?
I remember going to the ER, they sent me home. I went to school the next day. It just gives you an idea of like how long it took back then to get blood work back. Because, if you're in the ER now, it's like 2 hours. They're going to tell you what's wrong. But I was at school the next day and the nurse came into my class. And I remember she gave me a glass of water in front of like the whole class. I remember at my elementary school, they had that nasty, rusty tasting water. Do y'all remember stuff like this?
Yes, we had water like that too.
And she was like, she handed it to me like, you need to drink this right now. And I was like, I am not wanting to drink that nasty tasting water. That's exactly what I was thinking. And so I'm like drinking it on the way. And she goes, you got to come with me. Your mom's coming to get you. So I'm like up at the nurse's station drinking the gross water. And I was thinking, why is it so important that I drink this gross water here? And so the next thing I know, we're leaving and we're going back to the hospital. Wow. They admitted me and basically, explained that I had really high levels of CK. I think it was like in the 20,000 to 30,000. Your normal is like less than, I think, 400, and mine was that high. So
yeah.
Then the advice and guidance was be careful that she doesn't overdo. The next phase of childhood was I could play, but I had to be careful how hard I played, how hard I ran, and the stress of me monitoring that as a kid. And that's why I really identify with a lot of these little kids I know, and their parents are saying, running too much, you're doing too much physically. And, I can remember just being like, okay, well, how do I know? Where's the level? What's that line? And I remember they gave me like urine strips to test my own urine to see if I had myoglobin in my urine. And I remember having those and being a little kid and testing my own urine and then using the pH strips and looking. And then I was like 7 years old doing this type stuff. And so that's probably why I ended up doing what I do, because I was like exposed to so much medical science at such a young age. And, knowing what CK values were at 10, then I was kind of like a student with my neurologist. I would ask him a gazillion questions because I wanted to understand like why I was having rhabdomyolysis and how could I prevent it. It was an interesting thing to be like a little kid with a rare disease,
I'm listening to you describing yourself as a student of your neurologist, and I like how you characterize yourself, and it just indicates that you took an active role in managing your condition, that you were not like a victim of this condition, but you were a student of it.
Yeah. That's pretty much what it was. I remember we had a medical encyclopedia and I read the whole medical encyclopedia. It was like 450 pages. I was like in fifth grade. Yeah, in fifth grade, I read the whole thing. And isn't that weird? It's so weird for a kid to do that. It was just like me trying to understand and what was wrong. And I was very athletic though. I could run, and as a cheerleader, you kind of think muscular dystrophy. You're thinking like, was she already using a wheelchair? I was not. I was running around. I could walk up steps. I could get up off the floor. I could do literally anything any other kid could do. And that was just the strange part about it, is that I had this issue that if I overdid it, I would have rhabdomyolysis and muscle cramps and pain. So I was always experiencing like achy muscles and thinking that, like I said, was normal. And that, remember going through my teen years, and I was in gym class and I was trying not to overdo, so like the gym teacher was like, you're just lazy. And I was like, no, I'm not. I try and explain what rhabdomyolysis was to a gym teacher was like really difficult. They didn't understand it. And, IEPs back then, cause I was in, we're talking like early, 90s, being in, school and that kind of thing. And it was still like people just didn't understand all that. And so trying to like explain it and advocate for myself back then was a little harder than I think it is now.
And if you're a student neurologist, then it's not weird to read a medical encyclopedia.
I remember my parents talking about it because I remember going and saying, hey, I read about blood clots, and I was like, in 5th grade, and I remember going to my parents saying, "Hey, I read about a blood clot, and my leg was hurting." Because remember I was telling you I have muscle pain. I remember going, "Do y'all think this could be a blood clot?"
You took the medical education that was available to you in your house to supplement the medical education in your appointments. So
How did your parents respond and react, not just to that comment, but just like your overall level of engagement with your care? I think it's really awesome.
I remember them saying like I was just an unusual child in a good way. They said, I was just, I thought like an adult very young and processed things, in the sense of like I wanted to solve a problem. I was just that type of person that never took no for an answer. If you told me no, I was going to try to figure out how to do it. And you know how you can't take food into the movie theater? And I would always be like, is that a law? Because if it's not a law that I can't get arrested for, that means they just made up the law at the movie theater. So I was that type of person. Like I would try to figure out a way to get around something legally and still get what I needed to have done. So when I started the foundation, that was in 2008. And I think everybody finds it so funny because I wasn't planning to start a foundation. The backstory of that, Pantene shampoo was having this national competition and they were going to give one woman in America an award to start a foundation or help her create a wish to do something good for society. And this is what the competition was. And my friend, she sent me this. Oh, I think this is you. And I mean, I was thinking, what is she talking about? I just went on this thing. I entered it. They wanted me to write something out. I was at work. And so I was trying to do my actual job. And I wrote this. I entered the competition, not thinking anything. And then 2 months later, I get this phone call and it was like, you're a national finalist for this. And I was like, for what? I forgot. I had forgotten all about it. You're going to receive something today. We're FedExing it to you. And it was about that time my mom called me at work. She was visiting. Wow. She said, "You got this package." And she's so funny. She opened it. You want something? She goes, I think this is a scam. This is a scam." It was kind of funny. She said something about LA and you've got to be out in LA and Pantene shampoo.
Oh, wow.
She said, "I think this is such a scam." Yeah, well, I didn't even remember that I had applied for this. And so I call and I said, "Oh, I see this package that you said I was going to get." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, you got it." And the long story is I ended up winning this whole thing. And so that's how the foundation started. But it's really kind of funny.
Wow. It was founded on shampoo.
Pantene shampoo.
Of course, I have very little use for Pantene, but that doesn't restrict my love for Pantene for helping you start the foundation.
Yeah, that's funny, David. Yep. That's how it started. And
that's a great story.
I know. So, and the funny thing is like I was not planning to do this. In fact, when I found out I won, do you know what my actual reaction was? I was laying in bed at night and I went, uh-oh, crap. I'm actually going to have to do this. And the thing is, it was in the newspapers too. So it was on TV and it was in the newspapers and
witnesses.
There was witnesses
to the fact that you had to do the foundation.
Yes, and everybody knew. And so I was like, oh no. But then I was really like, I remember praying a few years earlier and I said, "God, if there's anything else I'm supposed to do in my life, I'm not going to pursue it. But if you want me to do something, it's going to have to land in my lap."
It landed on your hair.
In your hair.
Yes, exactly like that.
That's awesome. I assume you're an exclusive user of Pantene products now.
They're in my bathroom. Absolutely. I use Pantene. Yeah.
That's great. It's a great story.
It's just a crazy, crazy story that's absolutely true. And so
that's amazing.
Yeah. So, the foundation started in 2008. We had our first conference in 2008. I didn't think anybody would show up. And I was like, well, I'm going to do it and we'll see. And it was really for the whole muscular dystrophy community because I recognized that there wasn't anything that was patient led. I organized the conference and I brought patients in and I was just going to see what happened. And we had patients that showed up, actually. I was kind of surprised. I was like, wow, I can't believe people actually showed up for this. And we didn't have hardly any resources either. So we had all these, patients there, and I didn't know how to run a conference. So I just thought, well, we'll just all tell our stories. And the patients just started telling their stories. We all started crying because people said, well, I've never been around a bunch of people that have muscular dystrophy. There's nothing for adults. That was like the first time really I was ever at a conference.
I have to say it speaks to the power of people sharing their stories. Like, that's why we do this podcast. And there is nothing like talking to people who are living with the same type of condition with which you're living. There's no replacement for that. And otherwise, you're alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
We went quickly from your diagnosis to starting the foundation. And I wonder if we're missing anything in between.
Yeah. I worked in a nonprofit organization. I worked at a church and I helped counsel women through healthcare issues. I ran a lot of support groups. I spoke a lot publicly and led a lot of things.
Wow.
So when I started the foundation, I kind of already had an understanding of volunteer networks, programs, marketing for about 10 to 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
So pivoting into like what the Speak Foundation does was really kind of similar, finding people that have the same lived experience and kind of helping them bring about a community and developing that community. And so it just naturally dovetailed into me doing this for my own community. And in 2008, we didn't have that. And really, we didn't even have that for muscular dystrophy when it comes from the perspective of the patient. And so that bridges you up to where I'm at with the Speak Foundation now.
You were able to utilize your many years of experience working in the nonprofit world. Your conversations with people helped you understand connections can be very powerful, like you said, in the groups, to reduce isolation, an understanding of how to bring people together, and also how nonprofits work. Most people don't know that much about how a nonprofit works, except they don't make a profit.
That's true. That's true. When we started in 2008, there were no treatments on the horizon at all for limb-girdle, none at all. And genetic testing was not something that was being done. If it was through insurance. It was very expensive. And a lot of insurance companies weren't even offering it.
Yeah.
We're talking very different landscape in 2008. It was more about let's help everybody cope with the fact that there is no drug development in our area and there is no treatment. And there doesn't look to be any treatments at all anywhere. So it was more like, hey, you've got a disease and guess what? Nobody knows how to treat it.
Yeah.
So that's what it looked like in 2008. It was really more about the psychosocial issues, helping deal with it mentally and psychologically. As we started evolving as a foundation over the years, we didn't even have other organizations at all in our space. Every few years, another subtype would be discovered and a foundation would start. So now we are up to, I think there's 27 foundations in the limb-girdle space. I think most of them are all subtype specific because they're different mutations. In 2014, we've kind of pivoted to be a little bit more science focused. We did genetic testing in 2014 at our conference. We genetically tested all the limb-girdle patients at the conference, and that was very unusual to do. And we had patients actually coming in from other countries just to get the genetic testing. It wasn't even offered in their country. People were coming to get that test. And so we were diagnosing people at the conference. It was really wild. We had a researcher there and we had a patient that had a really complex diagnosis. She didn't know what form she had. And she asked a question from the audience. The researcher started answering it and diagnosed her right there at the conference live.
Oh,
Some
wow.
crazy stuff. And
Crazy exciting.
it was really exciting.
Really?
Yeah, it was just like the first time people really started trying to answer these questions that patients really had. And I remember Dr. Matthews was so kind and flew into our conference. We just started really meeting the needs of what patients were dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And so it's evolved. So by the time we hit 2017, that's when we started hearing about treatments that might be coming out possibly. And so that's when I started realizing that, get this, you're not going to like it when I say this, but I didn't want biotechs and pharma leading. I wanted the patients leading.
Yeah, I like that. We love that, Kat.
We support that comment, Kat.
That is so important. And again, we are always talking to our colleagues about start as soon as you show any interest in any condition, hear what their experience is like, and also what would make a difference in their lives. It's important that we get a full understanding, and there's only one source for that, and that is from the community, people, as you say, who have lived experience with the condition.
Yeah, so important that people with lived experience are at the table. And honestly, my philosophy is that they should be the loudest voice in the room. It's the name of our charity, the Speak Foundation. We speak up for those who have no voice. That's the purpose of our foundation.
Yes, Kat, someone recently said, we don't want a seat at the table. It's our table. Sit with us and learn from us.
Bring out the extra leaves.
That's the attitude that we hope that our colleagues in biotech and pharma and in academic medicine and in medicine understand, is that the table is the table of families and children and adults living with conditions, and we have a lot to learn about them. Even if we know the science, we still have a lot to learn about them.
Yeah, I appreciate, David, you saying that.
The Speak Foundation then really welcomes everyone with every form of limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, correct?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And not just limb-girdle, because there's a lot of neuromuscular diseases that do not have any representation. They don't have any organizations. So we'll have rare disease in NMD, neuromuscular diseases, that will ask me, can we be a part of your foundation? We don't have a home. We don't have a community. And I've always said everybody has a home here, and we'll never kick anyone out. It's just part of our ethos and our ethics is to be there for people that really don't have a rare disease home. And there's a lot of people like that.
Yeah. You have to take the big tent approach.
I know. I just feel that way. And, when somebody's very alone and they're looking for community, that's a desperate place for someone to be. And I always say, get on board. And I said, right now you're a unicorn, but I might find another unicorn. And then you two can get together and start another foundation, for your rare disease. These Facebook groups too, we have people come on and asking questions because they're undiagnosed and they have symptoms that look like limb-girdle but don't quite add up to limb-girdle. And so we have a lot of patients like that are still in this not being diagnosed category. And sometimes it's just because that genetic form has not been discovered yet. So remember, we're all the way up to LGMD to Z.
Mm-hmm.
They ran out of the alphabet, so they had to create a new nomenclature for limb-girdles. So we're discovering, new forms all the time. That's why I said, we just have to keep our arms open and our table large, like you said, because there's just lots of people that are undiagnosed still.
Yeah. And now, looking ahead, you've thought of some additional innovative ways to further meet the needs of the community. And I'm hoping you could share a little bit about that, your recent work with the FDA.
Yeah. We started developing innovation in this space. And as I mentioned before, I thought completely outside of the box. Or one issue that I saw was science that's very complex. And unless you're a specialist in this area studying this daily, you're probably going to be a little bit removed from the nuances of that particular disease. That's when I started to think through with others in a multi-stakeholder environment that the FDA needed to hear from our world experts. We developed the scientific workshop where we could bring FDA all of the world-class researchers, all of the companies that were developing cutting edge treatment. Everybody can be together in that one space, and then everyone could hear where the science was. I think with FDA, a lot of the time, there's just no way for them to be experts on every disease. I mean, think about the impossibility of that. And so this scientific workshop was really where we brought experts in and really had a consensus discussion really all day about limb-girdle. And that is what the scientific workshop was about. It was really so successful that it actually spurned a bill in Congress. The Scientific Expert Act is right now in Congress, and it's to develop scientific workshops like what we had last year because it really hadn't been done before.
In front of me is an article called Limb-Girdle Muscular Dystrophy Scientific Workshop, which was published in the Neurology Clinical Practice Journal, October 2025. Something that really innovative because people coming from different perspectives.
Every voice. So that ability to have like a workshop where we're bringing like a meeting of the minds together for this particular rare disease is really critically important. And the multi-stakeholder environment too is so important. You've got to be able to bring everyone to the table. It's very technical information. The journal article that you're referencing, it's very unusual to have FDA as co-authors on a journal article with industry, patient orgs, and researchers. You don't typically see that at all, but it just speaks to how special this event really was for the limb-girdle community.
So currently, Kat, never until this event that you organized were all of those people together at one place at one time, hearing the same information, having conversations together.
Yeah, that's correct.
Has the model been used in other conditions that you're aware of?
I think that the Reagan-Udall Foundation has taken up the process of having science-focused drug development meetings. And I do think there was a couple of others that have taken place since our event. But I think if it could get passed, it would be something that would be an official program. I would love to see that others would be able to have this opportunity.
I was struck by a couple of things in the article, Kat, and I understood what some of the challenges are. And, one of them is that limb-girdle muscular dystrophy is rare, but when it's divided into the subtypes, each one of them is very rare. And, that might put off some researchers and some biotechs because of what appear to be the numbers of people affected. These conditions are known as slowly progressing. When researchers hear that, they realize that this is hard to study because it could take a long time to notice a difference. What's included in the paper is that from the perspective of people living with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, the progression is not slow at all. And that, in fact, may be a misconception. So I wonder if I could ask you to comment on that.
It's such a good point that you're making because people are assessing limb-girdle based upon the comparison to other neuromuscular diseases. Sure, there's some that are more fast progressing, and they're the ones that are fatal at a very young age. So when you do that, you're saying, well, this disease looks worse than this one, but the limb-girdles are very serious and they are deadly as well. I mean, I can't tell you how many friends of mine have passed away with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. I mean, it is deadly. It is not a slowly progressing disease.
Yeah. To me, the workshop is really a major achievement and a model that can be repeated. I really encourage everyone to read the article. It's available for free online. If Google limb-girdle muscular dystrophy scientific workshop, you'll find it.
Kat, can you tell us a little bit about the upcoming activities for the Speak Foundation?
Yeah, sure. So we have the Limb-Girdle News magazine, which is focused just on limb-girdle. It's published quarterly, and that'll be important because it'll have, all of the information about clinical trials, drug development. It has scientific articles, but it also has articles for patients. We will also do a summit this summer for the science and the advocacy in our space, and that will be a virtual event that will take place June, July timeframe. And then we also are developing the LGMD Centers of Excellence. We have a whole scenario unfolding in our healthcare system where patients can't get into treatments or into clinics within a timely amount. Patients saying, well, it's taken me 10 months to even get an appointment. Well, we all know that's not going to work when we have FDA approved treatments. I want to really solve some of these problems that our patients are having. All the funding that's been removed, they're just struggling to have administrative support. So that's part of our grant process for these clinics, is to help give them some more infrastructure just for limb-girdle.
Always curious, what is it that helps someone move from one experience to another? And, what fuels this for someone who becomes an innovator?
In terms of innovation in rare disease, I think what is so important is that in order to do it, the person must look beyond what they are receiving. It has to be that you are willing to look beyond yourself. What does this entire community need? And that is the position you must take. Because if you start off with, am I going to receive the treatment? And then your whole focus is about yourself or your children, it's really difficult to have the vision you need to innovate for the entire community. I really would love it if people had the ability to look beyond themselves. And I really think that's how you really move them all forward.
What a pleasure talking to you. You've accomplished so much. Each individual act adds up to something that determines our fate, and your experience working in nonprofit also helped prepare you to be a leader of a really effective organization, Kat. So I personally have learned a lot from our conversations.
Thank you so much. Well, we appreciate your support, and thank you for bringing me on today. What a great platform this is. And I just want to say thank you to BridgeBio for all of the wonderful things that you do as a company. You guys are so patient oriented, which is an incredible ethical way to be as a company. I've seen it in everything that you do.
What a lovely person Kat is. She is warm, kind, interesting, and David, I truly enjoyed our time talking with her. Throughout her life, she was curious, tried to learn more, tried to investigate her condition when she was younger, saw needs, saw gaps, saw where there was an opportunity. She recognized this need for collaboration with industry, researchers, the FDA, scientists, and created this new innovative model, the scientific workshop. So Kat has been an innovator and a go-getter since she was 6 years old.
Absolutely right, Mandy. And I'm very curious myself. What is the path from going from being a person living with a rare condition to becoming a leader? And I think there are elements of Kat's experience that we all can learn from. She was a risk taker and a rule breaker, and that the Pantene contest dropped in her lap. She also took her experience that she had gained working at her church in nonprofit as a group leader, and just as we heard from the wonderful Effie Parks on an earlier On Rare podcast, Kat understood the importance of finding her people, and that she provided an opportunity for folks to tell their stories.
Thanks, David. Thank you to Kat for being a part of our Innovators series. Thank you to our exceptional producer, Amy Brooks. For more information about LGMD2I, check out Kat's organization, the Speak Foundation, Cure LGMD2I Foundation, the LGMD2I Research Fund, and LGMD Awareness Foundation. If you liked this podcast, please subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments, write to us at onrare@bridgebio.com. Thanks for being with us today, and join us for our next conversation with another innovator on Rare.